Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Good afternoon. It's the 5th of September. And just a little bit of doom and gloom outlook. Apparently we've had 1 million cases per week for the last 2 weeks of COVID-19, which breaks down to something like a little bit over 140,000 cases per day. And so that's like 2,800 cases per state. And that averages out, if there's an average of like 62 counties per state, that's like 45 cases per day, per county, per state. Like, man, this is just, it blows my mind that somehow there are still people that either aren't taking this seriously or don't think it exists, or they're taking it, they're taking it seriously, but they just don't trust the medical community, the medical and science community, and they're taking upon themselves to work with information from like almost a year ago or something about how, you know, ivermectin kills COVID in cell cultures in 48 hours, but there's no like corroborating research to prove this with any kind of living subject, human or otherwise. It just blows my mind that people are consuming dewormer and antiparasitics, like things that weren't even originally meant to be ingested, like area killing insect and parasite killing chemicals that were sprayed. They had to be modified for ingestion by any kind of organism, let alone humans. And and then there's the little bit about how it's like, you know, a horse-sized pill or a cow-sized pill or a goat-sized pill. None of these animals have the same kind of weight or metabolic processes as a human does. And so to expect any of these kinds of pills that are designed for animals, for farm animals, and for a human to take that and expect anything to actually come out like as expected is just beyond me. But then, of course, you know, I've read about people taking the horse pill or the cow pill and shitting in public, like they're at the grocery store and they shit themselves. And then some people are really unfortunate and they bleed out their ass because that shit is causing like the most horrible up crap to go on in their intestines because it was never meant to be there.
Yeah, I find it interesting that they decide to pick and choose when they are finding scientific studies where it's like, so the whole reason ivermectin was a choice was because there was a supposed study that showed, I mean, the study was obviously real, but it's the poor understanding of how to use studies that then you have people looking at this study that had nothing to do with human subjects and then saying, oh, it killed it in a petri dish. It'll work the same way in my body, not being the same, you know, this is the same, oh, it'll work. If bleach kills it on a surface, bleach will kill it in my body. So these people are not the sharpest tools in the bowling bag, but then you have, it's like they want to take certain, like one study that they don't understand human subjects process to then say, oh, this study that wasn't done on human subjects is somehow more valid than the months of research they put into the vaccine, even though then they'll claim, oh, they rushed the vaccine. Well, this is one study. And if you understand anything about observation, the ability to reproduce the results is what's most important. So if the one study was like an individual thing that didn't really have a bunch of follow-ups, then it's like, well, ivermectin may have worked in a petri dish that one time, but it probably wasn't a viable actual solution to treatment. And that's kind of the monoclonal bodies that originally they were trying to use to treat people before the vaccine was developed. And it's like, even down to vaccines are not treatment.
No, they just prevent us from getting really sick.
But they can also be used to prevent people from getting the variants. So it's like people who get sick getting the vaccine is not a treatment. It's like they'll end up, if you get sick, they won't give you the vaccine until after you've gotten healthy again. And once again, the people who are obviously taking horse dewormer and then clearly not smart enough to do the math to then downsize the dosage to a human proportion and not the tonnage of a fucking horse. And those people are, they're not smart enough to be rationally thinking about why they shouldn't be. The fact that we're even discussing this is it's Joe Rogan's fault. Joe Rogan, Alex Jones. It's all their fault. These fucking morons have been.
Joe Rogan took ivermectin.
Yeah, and he's been touting it. And this is the whole reason I'm pointing at him is he is the spearhead of the anti-intellectual destruction of America, and he's using freedom as his shield. And it's one of the grossest things I've seen in a long time because I used to be a fan of his. So as somebody who was on the, Joe Rogan message board in 2011, 10 years ago, that's fucking crazy. I saw it happening where more and more Stormfront people were coming over to his board and he was trying to act like he didn't see it. And eventually he had to post something and sticky a note that's like, no racist language, no using the N-word, don't call Chinese people X, Y, and Z. And it's there was an element of the racism on his forum got so bad that he had to address it just to make sure that he didn't get blamed for it. And eventually he had to shut down his forum because it just got so bad. And I think when he's transitioning to having millions and millions of followers, it was going to come back on him how racist his forum had become, and he wasn't going to be able to explain it away. And this is kind of where, he gave Jordan Peterson a platform to manipulate and brainwash a bunch of American teenage boys to become douchebag chuds that walk around using this alpha beta terminology, but in reality, they're all just sheepish followers of Joe Rogan. And it's all, if it's not Rogan, it's Alex Jones. If it's not Alex Jones, it's like Milo Yiannopoulos. There's this group of right-wing influencers. Yeah, Joe Rogan's a right-wing influencer now, which is crazy. Because he built his platform trying to act like he was on the left. And seeing it play out, you see these people do these transitions, and it's almost about a 7-year period where you see them at the beginning of the 7 years, they're one thing, and at the end, it's another. And you almost want to chalk it up. Oh, Joe Rogan's just getting old. Nah, it's not that simple. Joe Rogan made $100 million bending to the right wing, bending to the anti-trans language, let's talk about Fallon Fox and, having no expertise in any of these fields, bringing on experts and giving an air of credibility to the conversation, only to then use his platform to spew right-wing talking points almost 60% of the time. So this is where I know Joe Rogan's formula because I used to watch him, and this is how I know what he's doing concerning using his platform to pretend that he's going to call himself a libertarian, and he's all about freedom, and he's drifted more and more into right-wing libertarian rhetoric, but he tried to act like he was on the left for a while. He really was trying to push like, oh yeah, Hillary Clinton, blah blah blah. That should have, I mean, that should have been a red flag right there.
Joe Rogan's show is really kind of interesting to me because just as a case study, they do a lot of things really well. The production is really good. They have a broad diversity of guests. A lot of different ideas get talked about. He gives a platform to some ideas that I don't believe should be given platform, but that's he's got a finely tuned machine that knows its audience. So what do I know, right? But it's really been kind of troubling to me to watch this slow kind of drift towards kind of like, I'm not even sure if I want to call it like identity politics, but that's what it really is. He's helping to paint an image, like a put your face here type of image of what it means to be politically involved or passively politically involved or somehow participating in a dialogue. But I'm not even sure if like the everyman kind of inquisitive nature of his show is genuine anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it is. And I do think there was a time when it was organic and inquisitive in a way that was not about pushing an agenda or making money from a specific demographic. It hasn't been that way for at least 4 years. So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if anybody knew the truth about whether UFC was really just a bloodier version of WWE, that would be Joe Rogan.
Oh, that's not. I mean, there's no way. It's like it's impossible to anticipate the things that happen in those types of matches where you can't. I was watching the fights yesterday. Some dude broke his kneecap in the middle of a fight. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't an accident. Someone kicked his leg and it broke the kneecap. So it's, when you see that type of shit happen in real time, it's just impossible to script a lot of the things that go on. The way that professional wrestling is scripted gives them the leeway to have choreography that they work on, but also that they improvise. There's no room for that in mixed martial arts. And the reason I say that is there's enough eye pokes at every event where an eye poke is something that if you tried to poke someone in the eye, you wouldn't be able to do it for fucking 10 minutes if you tried. The frequency that they occur during these events it's just chaos. Yeah. And there's this element of chaos where you can't build a script around that because eventually the script is going to fall apart in real time and it's going to be obvious because this is how there were scripted fights in Pride and in Japan back in the days. And it's very obvious when shit gets scripted. And that's why the organizations fell apart. Because if you try to set something up and have somebody take a dive in the second round, for example, let's say, we're going to have it go to the second round and one person's in on the fix and the other person's not. Well, if you accidentally knock out the other person in the first round and then you look apologetic after winning, shit looks weird. You know what I mean? Like, if you knock somebody out and you, oh, I didn't mean to do that, shit starts to get weird. So there's these elements of the way that people react to things starts setting it up to key the audience in on that there's a fix in the first place. So it was only a matter of time before those organizations were discovered because fighters would, be really dominant in one round, and then in the next round, it's another person came in, and what's his name? Bob Sapp, for example. He didn't fix fights. He would throw fights for the sake of his own longevity, and you could see it happen where Bob Sapp was he was a sideshow, a freak show, and then once people figured out, oh, this guy can't fight for shit, he kept taking fights and would basically just let himself get beat up by people who you would think looking at him wouldn't have a chance, but anybody who actually knew anything would say, oh yeah, this dude destroyed Bob Sapp. So it's really hard to know what you're looking at if you haven't been in it. And I think it's really easy to look at the UFC and look at Dana White in the way that he's fed people cans and hyped people up and given people an easy path to looking good and make it think that there was a script there. Dana White is really good at building people up and giving them the fights that are going to make them look amazing. And their matchmaking, what's his name? Joe, it's not Joe Schilling, it's not Lozon, it's I forget the matchmaker at the UFC basically looks at fights and he's going to look at it and say, what's going to make the most exciting fight in some cases? And then in other cases, he's going to say, what's going to be the easiest fight for this kid who's got really good stand-up but horrible grappling to show off his stand-up. So then they're going to pick somebody who's a terrible grappler but also not a good striker. And that person is going to be, 10-2 on the amateur circuit. You've never heard of them, but then you give them a promo package, and then all of a sudden, this person looks like he might have a chance against the Sean O'Malley, the whatever that the UFC is building up at the moment. But really, he never had a chance because they handpicked him to lose, but they didn't tell him to go in there and lose. They gassed this kid up thinking, oh, you go in there and beat Sean, you might get a 3-fight deal. He goes in there, gets his ass kicked, never was going to win, but this is how they pick the fighters so that Sean O'Malley's look good without having to actively fix the fight. There's an art to it, and they're really good at it. But the people who've been around long enough are in on it in the sense of, oh yeah, I see how they're making their fights, so it's easy for me to look at one of their up-and-coming fighters and be like, yeah, this is a hype machine. Like Darren Till, for example. UFC was hyping up hardcore a couple years ago. Now that he hasn't done what they hyped him up to be, he's becoming a gatekeeper, but because he has regional appeal in Liverpool, they're going to keep him around as long as possible, and they're going to milk that Liverpool appeal until Darren Till is just a husk of his former self, never became a champion, but he got the UFC some more Liverpool fans. And that's how they do these people where you look at some, I'm trying to think of, like, damn, so many people have come through and like, okay, Sage Northcutt, perfect example. Sage Northcutt. This dude, because he was 18, had abs, looked like, you know, he could be All-American, but he was actually Canadian. This is the person that they were like, oh, this is everything a person imagines when they're going to be thinking of a fighter. They were trying to push this dude as the next big thing. Well, they did that too early in his career, but they don't care because it gets them more Canadian fans if they think Sage is going to represent us. So there's this element of going in and exploiting people at a certain point in their career when they're going to take as little as possible to get on the biggest stage. And then if that person fizzles out, well, they didn't invest all that much into him. So then now say the Northcutt has to go over to Bellator One or wherever he's gone now, pick his body back up because he destroyed his body trying to win in the UFC, going against the old veterans that can't make it past the championship level. So there's this mid-tier of just elite fighters that can't get to the top. They're the best rookies and the worst veterans at the highest level that then just destroy each other for everybody's entertainment, but for the profit of the UFC. These people never become UFC champions. They fade into obscurity, and then they never unionize. So there's this whole thing happening where the UFC has become really good at pitting people against each other, getting them not to talk outside of the cage. So the way that these camps are set up, fighters aren't talking to each other. They're not organizing. So I guess what I'm constructing is there is a veneer of entertainment that has to happen while maintaining an element of sport that is in line with athletic commissions. So it's in a very weird space. It's not a real sport right now. There are sport elements to it, but the way that they do the rankings don't matter. The person who makes the matches has more influence on the matches that occur than the rankings, and in that, then the actual structure or hierarchy of the system doesn't matter. So this is where I'm like, yeah, I do see that it is more entertainment in the same way as WWE than it is a sport like the NBA, because things like PFL have started to do the season structure and re-implemented the tournament structure so that there's a defined path to the championship that's not through the matchmaker. Joe Silva, yeah. And that's where it's like Sean Shelby and Joe Silva effectively have their decision making at the door of who gets access to the championship match, but they don't say who becomes champion, which is basically the only thing that separates it from WWE. It's like they might as well be making the champion because they're only giving certain access, but the fact that they are not deciding who wins a match before a match happens is how they're able to pass athletic commission standards. And that's where I'm like, it's weird because it definitely looks like WWE now. And I'm not trying to discredit that view in that it looks like people are fixing the matches, the way the judges score shit, the way that some of these uneven skill sets are put into the, like, on this weekend's card. Some dude, short notice fight, amateur. I mean, basically an amateur, but they're gassing him up like, this guy, he could, be top 10 if he wins. But then they have to say those things to make it seem like it's an actual even match. Otherwise, people would feel weird if they're watching a bully fight and not aware that, or not consenting to watching a bully beat down, because that show was fun, but there was an element of consent to it where it's like, yeah, this dude is a bully and he has consented to get into a cage with a trained fighter. As long as the audience has consented to knowing that there is this uneven skill set, then that's not deception. But there is an element of deception that's going on with the UFC when they're presenting these fighters as if they are equal in skill and as if that fight is organically constructed based on some sports structure.
I think the reason that I can't dissociate it from WWE is really it's the production. It's the intensity of all of it. And the part of it that's different from like basketball or baseball or football is that with a lot of like team athletics, they really go into like the history of the teams and the players, and they entertain you the whole time you're listening to the announcers. But what I get most out of the announcers, because a lot of these fighters, they might spend. I mean, is Contender Series even a thing anymore? I haven't even watched that stuff in years. But unless they've got like a really long history of fighting, like, and most of them don't because they're all really young, they don't have much to talk about. And so it's just kind of, that's when it starts shifting over to this thing with WWE, where when I watch that stuff, I don't know anything about these people, but a lot of them, I can tell they've been doing it for a while because a lot of these wrestlers look pretty old. And, they talk about these long-standing rivalries, or they talk about, whatever they talk about. And it just sounds like fiction. One sounds like reporting and the other sounds like fiction. It's just, it's a carefully, I realize that a lot of it is done on the fly. They have an idea of what's going to happen, but nobody can know until they get into the octagon and start, engaging in fisticuffs. But there's still a part of it that just seems like, these guys don't even know each other. They've never been in the same gym as each other. Well, maybe a few of them have, but I just don't buy it when you get two loudmouths in front of a camera and they start talking about all this shit. It's like, how do these people know each other so intimately?
Yeah, where'd the narrative come from?
Yeah. Did one of them? Did the UFC guys like send an envelope or a flaming bag of shit onto their doorstep with the other guy's name on it or something like that? Is that how it starts? It's like, oh, you're gonna fight so and so. By the way, they said you suck shit off the bottom of shoes. It's like, what? I don't know.
Well, you nailed on something. There's dead air that needs to be filled. So one of the things, there's like Mike Goldberg before I don't know where he's at now. I think he may be in hockey back again, or maybe he's like just not working at all. But he would do research and find out random facts about the people or the place they're from or their team, and just use those random facts to fill the dead air. So yeah, there is the color commentator, and then there's the technical commentator, and he was definitely there for color. But I think the narratives that the UFC has gotten into do make it feel, it's like they're trying to make you feel a certain type of way about the person because, yeah, and you're probably not watching the Contender series. You don't need, like, I had to Google to see if the Contender series was still even happening. Yes, apparently it is.
I mean, I liked that stuff because that seemed really raw. It's like these people have no experience. They don't look like they've been punched many times. And then you find out when you watch them, it's like, oh, this person doesn't actually have much juice behind what they're throwing. But then, it's an interesting fight because none of these people really have experience. And then to see them 3, 4, 5 years later on UFC, it's like, oh, they made it. Well, that's cool. But yeah, I'm not watching the minor leagues anymore.
But that gap doesn't exist anymore because there's so many UFC events that somebody might win Dana White Contender Series and then be on there the next week. I mean, after they're cleared or medically cleared after their most recent fight. But I definitely remember in the last year, people who came off the Contender Series recently as part of their narrative in the event, which is where I'm like, well, this makes this event feel like I'm watching an amateur fight. So I don't know. I think it was good when they had a 3 to 4 year gap between the Contender Series.
Yeah.
I don't think it was ever that long of a gap necessarily, but they seem to have some sort of trajectory that wasn't directly onto the prelim fights.
Yeah.
Because the prelims don't mean anything now because there's so many Contender Series. It's like the prelim fights are the amateur leagues, and then the main card, undercard fights are B League, or it's all, I don't know, the way that the narrative has started to dominate the conversation does feel like the quality of the fight has been degraded by proxy. And I think I'm not in disagreement in the way it appears, in the sense of like someone who watches UFC, I know exactly how it looks. It looks like Dana White looks like Vince McMahon. And it's really hard to tell the difference between the two when you have week-to-week narratives built around the new fighters. And this guy's coming off a 2-fight win streak. He's got some child support to pay. And, wait, what? Like, we're talking about child support? Okay. I don't know why.
In some ways, this might be considered progressive because in the 80s, when Macho Man and Hulk Hogan couldn't shake hands for 30 seconds because they did too much coke back in the back room, that's the stuff that I remember about like WWE or WWF. It's like these big bruisers flying all over the place, and then they get in front of the camera to try to talk, and they're just like, brother, and then they're just shaking the entire time. But now it's like, it's different. They're like they seem a little calmer after the fights. They seem worn out. That's kind of an improvement. That's a little bit more like less He-Man and more Mortal Kombat. Although I think the He-Man Masters of the Universe Tournament of Champions would be really awesome to watch. Like a real one. That would be pretty incredible. No weapons, of course. No fatalities. Just a bunch of like 700 to 1,200 pound people like wailing each other on top of a mountain and reducing it to a tar pit. We probably have to find a special planet for that to occur on.
You watch any bare knuckle stuff?
Bare knuckle brawling or boxing?
I mean, boxing. It's not brawling. It's like,
Well, I just want
They
to.
have boxing and mixed martial arts.
Oh yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure I was thinking about the right thing, because every so often I see some bare knuckle brawling on YouTube, and it's, well, I mean, it's entertaining, but it's definitely not boxing. The bare knuckle boxing that I've seen, like, is incredible, and those dudes seem to be able to have like stamina and endurance from beyond.
Yeah, there's a whole bare knuckle fight league now. I mean, I think I forget the name of the app they're on, but it's like because there's multiple bare knuckle leagues, they all, the MMA and the boxing, go on the same app. Like, they didn't have to, but they did. So, but I think that's kind of where there wasn't as much exposure to it in modern times.
Well,
that
bare knuckle
not
boxing is like
new.
is like the oldest version of it.
Right, yeah. So that's kind of where I think people associate gloved boxing with boxing, when in reality bare knuckles the the older one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
our perception of what what is barbaric and what's civilized is really mal the definitions are very disconnected from the realities in a lot of cases, where it's easy to think of bare knuckle boxing as being more brutal, but it's like, well, what type of brutal are you talking about? Cuts or concussions? Because when people are wearing gloves and the force is distributed over a larger surface area, they don't get knocked out as easily, but they still end up getting more concussive damage over time to their brains, because it's not it's not as easy to knock someone out with one blow.
The speaking of trying the knockout blow, the bare knuckle boxing matches I've seen, the winners usually are doling out body shots, because the few times that I've seen people who are like really, they're gonna take somebody out with the headshot, the guy that they're swinging at, they like drop their chin down to their chest and bring their shoulders up, and the guy invariably punches them in like the top of their forehead and breaks their hand. I've seen this like 3 or 4 times where they're going for it and they just tuck their head in real quick, and bam, that dude's hand is done.
Yeah, it's really easy to break your hand when
you don't have gloves. Yeah, like,
which also why you can't punch as hard. So it's, bare knuckle sounds more brutal, but you can't punch as hard because your hands break easier.
Yeah. And then there's the guy with one hand who still has like, a minute left in the round, and the other dude's got 2 hands. We can just, it's pretty easy to imagine how that turns out. And that's like if they keep on going and don't realize, like, or they're hurt, but they can't just be like, I'm done, I'm good, I'm done, my hand's broken. I mean, I'm sure if they like had some kind of compound fracture and there was bone sticking out of their hand, the ref would be like, nope, it's over. But I have yet to see that actual video situation. Yeah, bare knuckle brawling's crazy, or boxing's crazy. Like they do get cut up. They get but they get these incredible bruises because it's not a big glove; it's a fist.
Yeah, and the few fights, I mean, there hasn't been a ton in the sense of BKFC just started, I think, last year, but the ones I've seen, there's been way more handbrakes than I think I've ever seen in the UFC altogether.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you can tell when people in the UFC break their hand because they stop throwing shit.
Yeah.
And then they'll stop throwing it for a while, and then they may start trying to throw it again.
And then remind themselves why they stopped throwing it for a few seconds.
Yeah. So it's not like handbrakes don't happen. I mean, foot breaks, handbrakes.
Everyone watched Connor take a knee.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
leg breaks from throwing too hard. So that's definitely not what I'm trying to say, but it's one of the elements that the bone density builds over time for those specific types of strikes. So it's like people who are going to be in something for a long time, they're either going to break their hands a bunch or they're hardly ever going to break their hands. So, for example, Floyd Mayweather, his hands are notorious for breaking. So it's also one of the reasons he was a power punch, not a power puncher. He would have more knockouts in his earlier days than his later days because he realized being a power striker comes with having hands broken more often. So he laid off of the strikes as the heavier strikes.
Yeah. I actually enjoy his like more technical boxing matches where you can tell he's just driving points up. Where he's just clearly just like outboxing the other person. That stuff's really incredible. As far as like watching talented fighters go, he's like, it's like watching somebody play speed chess.
It really is. And you see, if you know what you're looking at, you can see that these people are thinking 3 and 4 steps ahead, and the other person's 5 or 6 steps ahead. And the way that they have to go back and forth when somebody misses or somebody lands.
Yeah.
It's
with like guys like Floyd who have like a really incredible grasp on technical boxing. If you just watch their feet, you know that they're in control at that moment because their feet are moving so like steadily and controlled, and the way they shift their weight. And then you watch the other person, no matter how, you know, ready they look, you just look at their feet and they're the one that's like moving around trying to figure out where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And in those, like, it's really, yeah, you're right. They are thinking several steps ahead, and they're just, you know, like, it's like when a cat corners a mouse or something like that, or a rodent, you know, there's that dance that goes on in the final moments before the cat catches the mouse. And it's just getting the mouse where the cat wants it at that point. Because cats are notorious for playing with their food. It's like the opposite of an owl. I think Mike Tyson is kind of like an owl. It comes out of nowhere and it hits so hard that the mouse has nowhere to go but into the owl's clutches.
Yeah. That's very appropriate.
And that's not to say Mike Tyson doesn't have like incredible technique, because young Mike Tyson's technique was out of this world, and old Mike Tyson's technique is still pretty fucking amazing, actually, considering all the things. But, you know, I mean, even watching Iron Mike throw those big guns, he was still moving his legs very deliberately. And when you watch him like bring his shoulder up to take that punch so that it can put his arm in the right position for that crazy ass cross or uppercut that he had, like, it's speed chess. It really is. It's crazy. I haven't seen a good boxing match in a while now that I think about it. They've all just been like exhibitions where it's somebody who's like really talented beating up somebody who's like either real young or real old.
Yeah, boxing pads records too. They they do the same thing as far as that's how you get the 30 and 0, 40 and 0. I mean, I guess it's not too many 40 and 0. You'll get the up and comer 18, 19 and 0. Because effectively, when you start having a loss, if you have one or two losses on your record in boxing, you're basically done for the most part in terms of your championship run.
Yeah.
But you can become a journeyman and a stepping stone. But there's just something about boxing where they want somebody who has an unbeaten record as their champion. So again, they're going to make that path. I mean, it's been made over time to be more difficult, and there's so many belts and promotions at this point. It's like the unifying all of the belts is really difficult.
Yeah, there's like the IBC and the WBC and the WBA and the who was the last person who had all the belts?
There's the WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to be the real champion, you have to be the champion in all four leagues.
Yep.
Does anybody actually have time to do that anymore? I mean, what with like everyone having to be on social networks and creating their own video podcast on YouTube and writing their cookbooks and owning liquor company brands.
Oh, so undisputed champion is the one who holds all four major titles at once, which is a unified champion is two or more. I did not know that there was a difference between undisputed and unified.
Let's see.
So they're not just saying these words like, oh, he's undisputed champion. Like, oh, it sounds cool. Like, no, that actually means something. And I assumed it meant something like I thought undisputed meant unified, but now knowing that unified is two or more, undisputed makes more sense as being all of them.
Let's see here. 2007 to the present, there are currently no undisputed champions in this era of all four. The closest were Vladimir Klitschko, Tyson Fury, and Anthony Joshua. They've all held WBA, IBF, and WBO simultaneously. And that's for heavyweight. And then let's see, for cruiserweight, Alexander Usyk. They've defended that title once. No light heavyweights. No, the light heavyweights. There are none present who have it. Super middleweight, none. Middleweight, none. So by adding that fourth league, it really threw a wrench in the gears for the undisputed champion.
But I think that also might be why it's been more difficult for heavyweight fighters to get interest in the public.
Yeah.
Because I think you can't call somebody the baddest man on the planet when there's two unified champions competing. And this is, I think, there has been renewed interest in boxing because there are two unified champions competing in Fury and Joshua, and then Wilder in the mix too. So I think there is an element of having all four keeps people interested, but I think at the same time it prevents one person from transcending to that Iron Mike Tyson status or Lennox Lewis status.
I don't think anyone's ascended to the level of Iron Mike. He defended his WBA, WBC, IBF championship 6 times. I mean, Muhammad Ali defended the WBA WC era 10 times, but that's only 2 leagues. Joe Louis defended it 26 times in the NBA era. So, I mean, how do we compare multiple leagues versus single league or double league? I don't think it's reasonable. You're right. They've made it so complicated that it's like... You know, what's interesting about this, though, is that, you know, there are no... They're not even listening. They're only listening like 3 guys. There are only really, if there are only 3 people who have ascended to the top of the mountain to lay claim, and if they're not fighting each other, then who are they fighting? Like fresh meat, old meat. Ugh. You know, I think this is actually like the reason that a lot of sports kind of just they lose my interest really quickly. It's that there's so much going on. They've made it so complicated that unless you start paying attention to this stuff like as a kid and are really invested, or as a very young adult and really get into it at an early age, some of this stuff is like just beyond complicated.
Yeah, it's really hard to know when to get into something. Like if you're an adult, especially, whether as a fan or a participant, it's really daunting to know if it's too late to become, if it's worth your time to get into something. And I think that's like, especially when it comes to sports, it's like, oh, is this person worth my time to be interested in them? And should I, or this team, either or, because then you start getting interested in a team and you find out, oh, they lose all the time. And it's like, well, shit, I got invested in this team and they haven't won a fucking championship in their respective sport for 100 years. So if I would have done a little research, I would have chosen the team across town.
The team across town has a better looking hat anyways.
Right. But I want it to be unique. And then it's like, you know, again, those are the things that if the team across town has a better logo, then everybody already's probably wearing it. So you don't want to then jump on the bandwagon that everybody's already on. So there's a lot of elements to social psychology and fan psychology that, yeah, it's a daunting task to get involved with anything. So I do empathize with people that are not already in something and looking to get into something.
Sometimes I wonder about people who are like, they're so into something that it's like toxic to neophytes. It's like, why would somebody stick around with something that they're clearly uncomfortable around? Because I remember going to parties and encountering people that just couldn't stand the music that was playing. It's like, why are you even listening if you're going to complain?
Right.
And why make this uncomfortable? And so I wonder, like, how many other kind of hobbies or activities are ruined for, you know, neophytes because they encounter the wrong people, like, that are just like, oh, you'll never figure out how to do it. It takes too long, or, you know, how are those people still involved in these things? Because I know that happens. I know that I've met plenty of people who are just like, I don't know what it is. They'll tell you that it's I mean, even just to enjoy it. I mean, like, not necessarily to ascend to the level of a professional athlete. I think anyone can learn how to throw a ball, though, and enjoy it. Or learn just to hit balls at a batting cage, even. That's really fun, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
But you got to be in shape, because you can break your wrists if you don't do it right. Break your shoulder.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was getting to a point where I'm like, I think I could probably break my hand hitting a golf ball if I did it too many times, you know?
Yeah, I think you're supposed to stop when that happens.
Oh, for sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, but it's a matter of it's not even the repetition, but it's the impact.
Yeah.
It's way more force transfer than it seems.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you hit the ground, ooh. I mean, I think when people were young, swinging a club and duffing it and just digging the blade edge into the ground, you know, you can recover from that. But that shock still hurts. But I think the older you get, the less times you can withstand that kind of impact.
Yeah, especially when you put actual might and weight into it. Yeah, that is no fun and can definitely hurt. So yeah, I think, again, as our bones get more brittle as we age, we find better ways to not put them in stressful situations.
Yeah.
That are going to possibly break them. But this is, like, to me, the difference between the survivors and those that were not meant to survive in nature, but now society has given them a net, in which the people that will not take vaccines or take horse fucking dewormer will end up surviving because, yeah, if they lose their vision from taking horse dewormer, they can still go to a doctor who's going to save them because that doctor is not that much of an asshole at the core, which I don't know if that's a good or bad thing.
No, there are FDA approved applications for ivermectin when treating worms or parasites in humans, but none of those things are COVID-19. None of those things are a coronavirus. Those are literally organisms, multicellular organisms that
how'd you get worms? How'd that person get worms?
Straight up. Like, I don't want to know, but I'm pretty sure you have to ingest something that has worms in them.
Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe they licked their hands after wiping the horse's ass.
Oh god.
That's not the point. But the point is that there is an actual FDA approved application for this, but it's not in treating the pandemic. Like like in no way. I'm pretty sure the FDA has like made statements saying do not do this. In fact, the company that produces ivermectin has a whole like sub page on their website dedicated to do not take this for COVID. They're not endorsing any. There's been no research into the application of ivermectin for COVID. No real research has been conducted. The people that make the shit are saying this. That's got to be the biggest sign. And this is totally one of those like kind of an answer to those who think that the pharmaceutical industry just wants their money and wants to keep them sick. They don't want your ivermectin money. They don't want you ivermectin sick. They don't want anyone to abuse the application of this chemical to treat the pandemic. That's the reality. It's like it's like you mentioned earlier. They want to pick and choose when they want to accept the research without having the kind of like fundamental understanding of how the research is used to determine the next phase of more research.
Yeah, it's very disturbing that I don't understand. I mean, I guess I at my core get it, But some of these people are sitting on like $100,000 or something stupid. Like, it's not that $100,000 is a lot of money, but somehow this person was able to accumulate enough money to pay people to keep them alive long enough for them to do some stupid shit like this. These people have vehicles. They're driving, Chevrolet Corvettes. Some of those people who are anti-vaxxers have had enough money to buy a fucking Corvette or some shit. I mean, Joe Rogan has $100 million. He's an anti-vaxxer. Somehow this
Joe Rogan has multiple $100,000 off-road vehicles, like Land Rovers,
in the sense of
Land Cruisers.
This fucking idiot was somehow able to accumulate $100 million, but somehow doesn't believe fucking vaccines work. This person is a demographic in this country.
Yeah.
So this is where I really have never had money as a motivator for my life, but even more so now, I am doing as much as possible to spend my time not trying to make money on things, because this is how you end up when you focus on money and you want to chase money and accumulate money. You end up becoming some fucking idiot that's taking horse dewormer pills or horse dewormer paste, or however the fuck they take it, going blind and ending up in the hospital shitting yourself while you can't fucking see because you're listening to Joe Rogan because he made $100 million and he's friends with Elon Musk. So he must know.
Yeah, man, those guys have a lot of money. They know how to do things, right? I mean, that's what we've been sold.
They've got to be smart. He's got $100 million. How else would he be?
He's got a Corvette and $100 million. He's got to be smart. I mean, you got to be a genius to have a Corvette, right?
He wouldn't be around all those smart people if he wasn't really that smart himself. Joe Rogan must be a genius. You can't be around all those smart people that often and not have some of it rub off on you, right? He's got to be getting smarter just by being around all those smart people, right? That's how it works, right?
I mean, I like to think of the world as a series of rooms where each room is like in the next level of success in some ways. Like you succeeded at accomplishing thing, you found the door to the next room, then you can hang out some more and be proud of yourself, or you can go into the next room and face the next challenge. And I think it's reasonable that sometimes some people just happened upon the door to the next room and just decide to go through it anyways, whether or not they've actually need to be there or are going to contribute in a meaningful way to the kind of interaction that's going on in there. But it's hard to tell. Maybe we need that kind of extremism to exist in those areas of dialogue so that we can identify where the boundaries really are. Maybe that kind of I mean, it's kind of like a clown or a court jester. They say a bunch of bumbling weird shit, but in a lot of ways it helps to expose the things that we actually need to start thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree in that those aspects of how those people function in society at large are needed,
but still the individual's message itself is the reality of their message is dangerous as fuck. And
yeah, but this is the difference between George Carlin and Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is kind of where George Carlin realized the responsibility he had with his platform in shaping people's perceptions. So his attempts to make people more aware of potential manipulation did not discredit him because he was not attempting to manipulate people, whereas Joe Rogan does not go as far as George Carlin in educating his people, but gives a veneer of doing the same thing, only so far to give people the sense that they're questioning everybody but except Joe Rogan. He only gives them enough equipment to question everyone else, but not to question Joe Rogan. Because then when you start questioning Joe Rogan, he's just a comedian. This is just jokes. He's not the serious one. And then he deflects. And all of those things he said in that serious 3 hours, he's just a comedian. So I see how Joe Rogan is using his platform as a comedian to then have these pseudo-intellectual debates and then use his status as a comedian to deflect any criticisms that are cast at
that's like
platform.
the Fox News excuse. Oh, we're just an entertainment
100%.
magazine.
Yep.
Ugh.
while claiming to be fair and balanced. So
That's like, wait, so people used to be getting Fox, now they're getting Roganed?
Yep. Definitely. Well, and it takes one to know one. So that's where the only reason I'm able to call it out is because I used to think he was organically questioning everything. And the way that he brings on both sides of a discussion appears to be entertaining both sides of the discussion. But when you break it down, he ends up giving way more time and energy from his platform to one side of the debate and only ends up bringing the other side to appear equal. And it's a spin method that has been, he didn't invent it, but it really works well on American people, and specifically dudes with bad male father figures or no father figures. Joe Rogan really works well on that demographic specifically, and he empowers them to feel accomplished for doing nothing. And I think that's where you get these Wikipedia, YouTube university graduates that then feel empowered to tell Neil Gaiman about something he wrote and tell him he doesn't get it, even though he wrote it. That actually happened. That happened. I'm sure. I don't know. That person didn't claim to be a Rogan watcher in the post, but I know that if you're on Twitter telling Neil Gaiman he doesn't know something about a work that he created, you watch Joe Rogan. I already know that. I don't need to have anybody tell me. I know you watch Joe Rogan.
Well, that reminds me of when The Handmaid's Tale was all over the discussions on the internet, and one person took it upon themselves to tell the author of The Handmaid's Tale what the book was about. And I just remember thinking, it's
Rogan
like,
fan.
Yeah.
Clearly a fan of Joe Rogan.
It's just one of those moments where it's like, I think they responded to not a correction, like a clarification that the author made on Twitter. And it's like, well, actually, it's about all these other things. It's just one of those cringing moments where does this person not realize they can look up on the internet that they're using who they're talking to?
But then they might not even care.
Yeah.
There's a point where I saw a writer from, he writes some science fiction stuff, and he had written for Next Generation, and I think maybe Deep Space Nine. I think he wrote for a couple of the series. And I said something along the lines of, it always seemed as if the Enterprise was the tip of the spear, and the Federation was engaging in military industrial practices. Like, why were they carrying weapons if they're really truly an exploration vessel? And he's like, that's the worst possible faith interpretation, and you're just wrong. And I'm like, and internally, I still think I'm right, but I'm not about to be that person arguing with somebody who wrote the show. So if he says I'm interpreting it wrong, I'm not about to go back and forth with this dude and be like, I think even though you wanted it to come off one way, it really came off this other way. And when you're watching it as a viewer, this is actually what's happening. Because that person's an asshole. And this is where I had the chance to take his explanation at his word and be like, yeah, it may look a certain way, but the writers were not intending it that way. So even though it appears this way, this is not actually what's happening.
Hey, the United States is engaged in decades of good faith-based freedom bringing, and a significant portion of the world thinks of it as acts of imperialism. So
yep.
It's not, I think once the writers are definitely in control while they're writing, but once it gets out in the wild and once it's been produced and once it's in the hands of the viewer gets to interpret a lot of things. And we can definitely defend the intent of the writers and their goals, which is probably to spread socialism, space socialism, which I approve of. And I love the Star Trek universe and their intents, but I also enjoy this modern take on Star Trek, where the universe is, or the galaxy is flawed, and the Orion Syndicate's running things, and the Federation is a crumbling entity that can barely keep the lights on. So,
right, obviously, it was not a perfect ideology if it didn't last.
Yeah.
So, they in the writers in
the Federation was a star empire of its own.
Yeah, it became that. If it wasn't always, it eventually became that. If we didn't see it happening, and this is where I think it was happening in as early as Deep Space Nine, if not Voyager. So this is where I could create an argument and debate the framework that I still hold true, but I'm not about to do that with somebody who wrote the show, because that puts me in the asshole camp.
I think
it's like I can have my ideas, I can have my perspective, and I actually voiced it to the writer. But as soon as the writer's like, that's not what we were intending at all, then you gotta drop it. You gotta drop it.
But what's interesting, of course, is that decade later or whatever, when they start writing Deep Space Nine, they created the character Takuvma, which identifies the Federation. When they say when the Federation says we come in peace, to them that's an act of aggression. That they're identifying those words as a statement made in bad faith.
Yep.
And so the Klingons may have been right. The Federation may not have been everything that we have been led to believe. I think that they've done a lot to try and answer those kinds of questions. Like, is Starfleet really the benevolent entity that we think it is? It is a socialist entity in a lot of ways, and they succeed in incorporating a lot of various societies and civilizations, and without obliterating their respective cultures. But then everyone has to be compliant with the Federation.
Is it just a lower grade version of the Borg? And then there's an argument. You got
to be warp capable before you can even apply.
Exactly. They're not even going to help you out if you're not as advanced to a certain level. Yeah. They'll pass your planet, and you may be on the verge of dying, and they'll be like, "Sorry, you guys don't have good enough technology. This was going to happen. Can't do anything about it."
And then, of course, the data character says, "Oh, but by the way, there are some very interesting ores and elements that we can extract, materials we can extract.
Dilithium crystals? Oh, actually, we do have something that would solve that plague. Yes. We can actually save your species. But we're just going to save you so you mine the dilithium, and we're just going to come back and check in. We're going to give you a few tricorders so you can get these people healed. We're not going to give you enough technology to get you out of the industrial phase. So you're going to have to mine that dilithium.
And we're going to
You're going to go ahead and have to mine that. It's going to benefit your economy. Trust me. You're actually going to grow your economy while you mine this ore. There's going to be some wars. We're not going to be here for that.
And we can't
That's
help you with
on
that.
you.
That's the Prime Directive.
Prime Directive says you guys got to figure that part out.
But we will supply
Once you
you
have
with
the dilithium,
medical
we'll be
technology.
back.
We'll give them plenty of antibiotics and no painkillers though. But we'll teach you how to prevent people from feeling pain while they're on the antibiotics and antivirals.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're more advanced than us. We need your technology. Here's some music. we have painters to offer you.
We have chocolate sundaes.
Have you ever heard of the trombone?
This is space jazz.
Yes, these are all real plots, except they didn't offer the trombone. Riker just forced the trombone on us. Nobody asked for that.
Oh, we left out chocolate too. Troy managed to solve quite a few problems with chocolate and sundaes. It's like, what the fuck? How are these powerful weapons in the future?
She ordered 2 sundaes, and then by the time they came, she was too upset and couldn't eat either one. Like, what the fuck was that? Like, you're a counselor. Get your shit together, lady. You're wasting food. You're like just all kinds of gluttonous right now.
Yeah,
and
there's a kid on Krylon C that's never had a sundae before.
Somebody's gonna have to go put that like back in the replicator and reabsorb that. You just gave them more work for no reason. Didn't even touch it. Just used it as a centerpiece to show how upset she was. Not even one bite.
I wonder what it's called, like what its official like nutritional supplement B or something.
I wonder if they know. It's like, oh, these are one of the drama Sundays again. Just use the broken replicator, and they know she's never actually gonna eat it. So it's like they just test to see. It's like, oh, we'll use cat food this time, see if she actually gets close. And it's like
the broken replicator. It looks right, but it never tastes right.
Also a real plot. The food was coming out tasting like cat food. Real plot. I think I'm just being cheeky and making these things up to try to mock the writers. No, I'm pulling from real plots. Cat food, real plot.
How many times did they let Barkley screw everything up on Next Generation before they let him be the savior of Voyager?
You know, though, Broccoli was onto something with the whole like not trusting the transporters, because how many times did they break down 2 people and recombine them into some annoying ass character?
Yeah,
it's like, you know,
but the transporters did preserve Scotty into the Next Generation, and the transporters did give us Thomas Riker, who is probably
transporters break the law of physics.
Yeah, well, Thomas Riker is a really cool character to emerge from a transporter accident.
Where did you get the matter from? Where'd the matter for Thomas Riker come from? That's what's fucking me up, man. Because that's where I'm like, so you're telling me they had the matter for a whole nother person just sitting in the fucking transporter? That's wild. That's crazier than Thomas Riker, because you just took a whole human being and cloned him with seemingly like no extra energy. I mean, it had to come from somewhere, but that's not what that shit's supposed to be for. So if you're telling me you can create a whole nother human being from a transporter on accident, that's the fucking real story. That's like breaking the laws of physics. There was not another human being's worth of matter that went into the transporter. There was one
you know, they always
worth
talk
and
about
2
the
came
buffer.
out.
They always talk
But
about
that's
the buffer.
but is the buffer like something that is able to produce new matter then?
I mean,
that's where I'm like,
maybe the buffer is just where they store the electrical consciousness, and then they just inject that into some kind of what is it called when it's a they use the word all the time in Full Metal Alchemist. It's when it's like a
drone. I know what you're talking about. In that structure is used in Altered Carbon and not Continuum, but there's another sci-fi series that uses that form of travel where you you can. I mean, obviously, Ghost in the Shell too. You can download your consciousness and upload it into a drone or a new body that's meant to imprint on. But that's not what transporters do. Transporters are meant to be one-to-one.
I mean, that's what
they put a copy in the buffer just in case. But that's what I'm saying is the buffer copy like matter in itself. That's
so
then
in how are up to speed are you on Lower Decks?
I'm all the way up to speed.
So in
they just did the Thomas Riker,
yeah, they did the Thomas Riker, like, you know, the security officer who sacrificed himself at the end of the previous season is walking around the Cerrito, and they confront the long-standing question of why do the bridge officers never die, and then because here's one that did, but he's still on the bridge walking around. And it's a really clever moment where like he starts to explain it, and then the fear arises, and they they explain it as, you just don't want to know. Once you know, you can never unknow. And maybe everyone is a clone. They've all just been spat out by the transporter, and the buffer tube just transfers their consciousness. And so when people die,
I mean, they did that on Picard.
Yeah, they did.
So that's what I'm saying. They do that in that universe. That's something they even do in the Star Trek universe. So it's not out of the realm of like possibility for that to happen in that universe. But that's not what they did with Thomas Riker.
Well, he was a clone that didn't get to the benefit of years of experience and training that Will got.
But I'm saying in the sense of like the transporter accident has not been identified as a cloning process. It's still like they even referred to it as the transporter accident in the episode.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah.
That's where it's like we're nailing onto something that they did on accident, I think. Like, I think by doing the accidental clone, they weren't thinking about where's the extra matter coming from.
Yeah.
But they just...
It makes for a good story, though.
It does make for a good story. The MacGuffin they invented, they weren't even thinking about the implications of what it means because they're so focused on the transporter split from that they don't even think about the extra matter for the second human because that's not what the story is about. And that's kind of where I'm like 20, 30 years later, or however, I guess it's like 20 something years later, the transporter accident is still not. Section 31 would turn this into technology if they realized what they had on their hands. You see what I'm saying? Like,
there's no reason to believe that Section 31 already hasn't done this with the technology. Section 31 could be completely comprised of clones.
I mean, I think they do at some point.
I mean, that's like the most... okay, straight up, that's the most imperialist shit possible, just to spit out a bunch of clones. We watched an entire other, like, space opera that involved the Empire, like, emerging from an army of clones. So, I'm just going to throw it out there. Star Trek universe has this imperialist element that's way stronger than people want to even acknowledge. Like, the dark side is real strong in Star Trek, that it's just not, it's it's like the religion aspect of Star Trek or Star Wars that doesn't translate into the Star Trek universe.
Yeah, I do think, because even the Native American episodes, well, they wouldn't be American anymore. The indigenous peoples episodes where they're on a different planet.
The formerly indigenous peoples episode.
Well, then the ones that are there are newly indigenous to that planet, the ones that were born under that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where them having to relocate that group was reminding us that they were not out of their imperialist tendencies, I felt. And that's kind of where in them even doing that, they were acknowledging that they weren't yet perfect, even though they were trying to be. So it's hard for me to accept that the Federation wasn't imperialist because they themselves acknowledged that they had moved the whole population, and that by them leaving the Federation, that they were no longer protecting a population that they had themselves put at risk. So there are things about it which is where I'm like, I can see why they thought they were not being imperialist on purpose, but there were imperialist tendencies that came through in the actions. But I find it hard to accept that there's no imperialism in the Federation. I don't think
that any kind of entertainment, literature, political, social commentary, what have you, that comes out from the core of the empire can fully extract those elements from the narrative. It's part of this might be America, but it's also, got some really strange imperialist behaviors from within our government, and this has been the name of the game for a couple hundred years now. Hasn't changed. And the writing the storytelling is going to reflect that. No matter how many socialist ideas they want to push, no matter how many times they want to push the message of do the right thing, these are the things that we know. We've talked about the whole concept of colonizing space being fundamentally flawed. And then so we have this example of Star Trek where they don't rely on dilithium for their power source, but they can generate their own food and oxygen and water, and occasionally they have to restock on some supplies, but for the most part they're relatively self-sufficient, and that's fine and good. But how did they get there? And there's always this glossed over. There was an incredible global war that decimated all of the earth and pretty much rendered the economies that existed non-existent. And to go from that through a period of great economic recovery just because the Vulcans show up, like there's a lot to it that we don't really, that even in an enterprise. And I'm not versed in Enterprise because I've only watched that entire series one time, but that's a really militarized version of Star Trek. It's not Starfleet yet. And I think that it's nice to project a version of humanity 100 years later or whatever that's moved past the collective desire for the accumulation of wealth and is pursuing more important things. It's nice to project that, but the Q pointed it out right off the bat. It's like, so show me why you deserve to survive. We're still that child race or child species that just figured out how to fly around space to them. And I don't think we can
pass the Q test.
Yeah, I don't think we can escape that easily. And just because Picard passes the Q test, and then humanity gets to go on that. Man, I don't know. I'd like to see Q and Cisco appear to advise somebody at the same time, though. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, I wonder if Avery was open to coming back, because it seems like he's still just in the.
I mean, he's
Just in
Captain.
the ether, right?
Yeah, he's Captain Cisco, but
Oh, he
he's
doesn't want to act again.
oh well, that sucks.
Oh wait, he says he does want to act again. I'm sorry, I read that wrong.
Well, that's awesome. They need to bring his character back because he's not just like Captain Cisco in a specific timeline. He's the Cisco. He's an interdimensional being, multi-dimensional being. He's the cool. He's like one of the coolest Starfleet captains that's ever existed.
So it came out earlier in January that he was willing to return. But I guess racism is stopping him in the sense of like, I in the same way that when he first came on, he wasn't able to become a captain until like season 3 because the viewership wasn't ready for it.
I thought it took longer than that.
Yeah, it may have been longer than that. I think he's still aware that the audience is not like that far evolved since he started.
The audience isn't ready for a black man portraying a godlike figure. Seriously? That's like so like the fans of Star Trek are not ready to accept a black man portraying a godlike figure. That's like the saddest fucking thing.
It's pretty true though.
Oh, dude, that's just so sad. That's like the biggest indictment on the culture of Star Trek. It's like we pretend to love aliens, but we can't a portion of us can't withstand the thought of a black man portraying a godlike figure. Really? Holy shit, I'm like ashamed to be a part of that group of people now.
Yeah, man. I am ashamed that I ever liked the Zack Snyder Justice League because of the way the Snyder fans act. There's this element of you don't want to be associated with a toxic fandom. And that's where, it's like when you find out shit like Star Trek fans are a little racist, like,
but that's like even weirder because it's like super counter to the whole, like, you can't be xenophobic and enjoy Star Trek. Everyone's an alien.
But then you realize why they love the Ferengi, because there's this element of while they pretend to be part of the Federation, they're really just fucking quarking the rest of the Ferengi at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that's why we end up so much focusing on Quark. He really did well with the focus group. Can we get more shots with that weird guy with the big ears? Kids think he's cute.
Quark and Garrick are two of my favorite characters because they're like the most conniving, underhanded dudes, but it turns out that when it comes down to it, they actually do the right thing.
Well, they were trying to make Ferengi barbaric and vicious at first. They just weren't scary enough to people, so they ended up kind of turning them into a joke species.
Yeah.
Because if you go back and watch the first...
Oh, yeah, they had those whips, and they were kicking the crap out of the fucking Enterprise away team.
But nobody was buying it, and the shit became just camp.
Yeah, because they like gave Worf a run for his money, and it's like, Worf doesn't lose a fight, a fist fight.
Definitely not to a fucking
Ferengi.
Fuck that.
I thought the reason that didn't work out very well is because the Ferengi had those stupid whip weapons that had to straighten out like a coiled sock snake, and then they shot their blaster.
I mean, it didn't work out for various reasons, but the biggest one being that nobody could take them seriously as a threat.
Although when Worf took control of Quark's body for Lady Grilka's defense or whatever, and he defeated Lady Grilka's man at arms. That does make me wonder: could a properly trained Ferengi or a Ferengi trained in Klingon battle techniques, that makes me wonder, they might actually be quite capable. Like, what if Ferengis like have some kind of innate physical intelligence that's never explored in the stories because they've been relegated to this consumer capitalism kind of high society thing?
I mean, Nog made it into Starfleet.
Yeah, he was the first Ferengi into Starfleet. First Ferengi captain too, or something like that, right? Or first Ferengi captain.
They named the ship after him eventually because the character or the actor died. But
yeah,
I don't remember. I don't know which episode you're talking about, but I don't remember that.
Nog's hardcore. He lost a leg and then went on to become a captain. Yeah. He's a Ferengi cyborg Starfleet captain. That's super bad. Yeah, I don't know. In Deep Space Nine, we get to see that Ferengi are actually very sophisticated, and they have an incredible grasp on mathematics and economics and technology, and they just look weird. But like every time they go to Ferenginar to visit Mookie or whatever, like she lives in an apartment building with a bunch of other Ferengi. That's cool, you know. They figured out how to live in communities. That's great, you know. They've got art, they've got music, they've got Sundays.
On that note, had you had a chance to see Reservation Dogs?
Oh yeah.
So I feel like your reaction is a good. You thought it was good. Man, at least
the scene when the drive-by paintball scene when they all get shot up and they're acting like they're getting gunned down,
which is a real thing that was happening across America for a while, if not still.
It kind of set this extra tone because, you know, they're like they in this story, these kids on a reservation who are engaged in small crimes so they can save some money to get off the reservation encounter a newly established rival reservation gang who are now taking it upon themselves to harass our mainline characters. And they play on a lot of tropes of small time criminal tropes, mob story tropes, but then they transplant them onto the reservation. They've got a guy who plays he's not incompetent, but he's got a lot of things working against him. A police officer who's just trying to do his job. It's pretty fun though.
Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun, and the way that the obvious play on Reservoir Dogs, and then they made the straight up visual reference in the end of episode 1. You know, I think it was good for them to get that out of the way, in the sense of, obviously, if they're going to be the Res Dogs as their gang, the Reservation Dogs illusion was a good trope to play on. And then the fact that they did it visually they didn't force it. It occurred naturally in a way where you're like, okay, this is clearly the illusion, but then the way they made it, they set it up.
Yeah.
And it didn't come out of nowhere. So that's kind of the structure. I think obviously Taika Waititi is not he's not bad at structuring things in the sense of he's good at telling funny stories, but I think it's yet to be seen if he's good at just telling stories without making them funny. And that's a whole, you don't necessarily have to be. That may be something he never ever does. But he's telling serious stories in this tale while also intermixing them with a ridiculous premise, which is also rooted in reality. So there's many layers to it that if you ever meet somebody on a res, there's gonna be somebody who's trying to get off the res. The way that the whole story is them trying to get out the res, that's a very common thing when you go just mix with people. They just, in fact, when I was hanging out at Pine Ridge, we did an event in Colorado, and one of the people that came from the reservation was like so struck by the city. Not that she hadn't been off, it was more so she was in a situation where she was off the res and had some girl that she was with or whatever that was like, oh yeah, you can come stay with me. They were hooking up or something. And it's like that opportunity, she took it, and instantly she was like gone. And I was like, whoa, this is a very impulsive decision to be like going to a city for one event and then deciding to just live there. And the shit didn't work out for long because it was an impulsive move, and obviously that shit wasn't gonna last. But to see somebody go to an event, meet somebody, and then be like, yeah, I'm gonna move my entire life because of this person I just met, it's not unique, but you see that there's this element of people just wanting to get out that the show captures really well, but also makes light of without mocking. So I think there are real issues that they address, and they do them without exploiting the people, without exploiting the premise, but also simultaneously highlighting it. Because that's a really fine line to walk when you're talking about a vulnerable population. There's like less than 10 million Native Americans in the country right now, which is fucking crazy. I think there were 4 million in 2010, and the population is doubled to, or over doubled to like 9 million roughly across all the nations. So we're talking about a very small portion of people that, when you're talking about these different vulnerable populations, you don't want to paint them as a monolith, first off, which they address in the series, because every res is different. And the reservation experience is not going to be the same, but there are these shared experiences around reservations which are coming through in the show that I think Americans just had no real access to. So then when Americans see this shit through Taika Waititi's lens, they're like, oh, are they making fun of black people because they don't have any access to the reservation or a reservation to see what's actually happening at these places? Because then that's what I'm like, I've seen reactions to this show where people are calling it anti-black because of the way that the reservation rappers act and the way that they're portrayed. And I'm like, man, this just to me exemplifies the gap between people of color in this country that has been created by imperialism and colonialism, that the show then alludes to when they're talking there's this segment.
I'm pretty sure that rhyming words over any kind of music, imagined or otherwise, is like.
I'm not talking about rap. I'm talking about the clothes they wear. I'm talking about how they talk. I'm talking about the gold teeth. I'm talking about the cornrows. It has nothing to do with the music over mute, like, or the words over music. That's like not even the thing that they were discussing. It's
really
the clothing. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like what is cultural appropriation when it comes to different groups doing different things? And this is where the way that the people in Reservation Dogs talk, the way that they act, a lot of people would see that, and as their first encounter with that, think that the show is doing that for American culture when that's how those people act on the reservations for various reasons. So this is where I'm looking at it. If Reservation Dogs is anti-black, then the Wu-Tang Clan is anti-Chinese. So there are these things about the way that somebody is interpreting appropriation and reverence to then be like, let's break down that analogy. How could the Wu-Tang Clan be anti-Chinese?
I think the Wu-Tang Clan is like the most pro-Chinese culture rap group that's ever existed in all of hip-hop.
But are they Wu? No. Are any of them named Tang? No. Are they from this dynasty? Like, no. So there are all these things. Them adopting that name, they have no actual connection to any of the things that they are adopting, except reverence for those things and those aspects of that culture. So in 30,000 dudes from New York calling themselves the Wu-Tang Clan, or however many people in that group, they are not trying to denigrate anything associated with the Wu dynasty or Chinese culture or Shaolin monks by saying, oh, Staten Island Shaolin. They're not putting themselves above the Shaolin monks. They're not putting themselves above the Shaolin temple. So people have to acknowledge that in the way that the Wu-Tang Clan has adopted certain aspects of Chinese culture, when other ethnic groups do that with hip hop, it can't be seen as anti-black. You just can't do it and see it as anti-black without then undermining one of the very foundations of hip hop itself by then extending that argument to the Wu-Tang Clan, because you can't call non-black hip hop people who use the jargon and who wear the clothing anti-black without them by proxy saying Wu-Tang Clan doing that with Chinese culture is anti-Chinese. That's how that extends, which is exactly why I could go into all these reasons why it's not anti-black, but that is the easiest way to illustrate that people speaking in hip hop jargon, people wearing baggy clothes, people wearing the up-to-date things that hip hop is doing, it can't by definition be anti-black unless they are intentionally doing it for mockery. If somebody's doing something to mock it, then obviously that's like, yeah, Paul Robeson dressing up in blackface, or what Roy Orbison dressing up in blackface is meant to mock black people and water down black culture for white people. That's not giving reverence. In a way, they probably thought it was, but it's very obviously not doing it. The way that other non-black cultures have embraced hip hop and also have been there from the start, it's obvious when people are mocking hip hop. It's very obvious when people are mocking hip hop. Now, there is a culture of hip hop on reservations that is being mocked. In doing that, if somebody is not aware of the hip hop culture that exists on the reservations, then I could see how they're coming from a place where they're like, oh, this is mocking black culture by doing this hip hop thing with Native Americans, and just being like, oh, what if these people were rappers and this is how it would be? But no, there's actually people like that in that situation, which is being represented on the show. So this is not, it has nothing to do with black people at this point in time.
I mean, urban culture emerges all over the place.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to emerge in an urban center. It can emerge in the again boony countries.
On that note, you see a lot of K-pop artists and Korean rappers doing things that if they were white, they would be called racist. But because black people are aware enough to know the context from which they are learning about hip hop, they are given more leeway to be like, yeah, you use the N-word in this track. Don't do that again. Just don't do that again, bro. This, like, I know you heard it on the track. Just don't put that in the song. Like, don't do that. And the way that they react to these things is like knowing that there are people who are new to something, trying it out and not treating them as if they're trying to steal it, because the way that the K-pop community rode for Black Lives Matter, it's only natural that, yeah, they probably liked hip hop in the first place. So yeah, they're going to want to protect the people that are making the music. And they did not shy away from putting their identities on the line by being associated with protecting the lives of black people from institutional racism.
So
that's why black people are like, yeah, go ahead and do some rap. And if you say the N-word, we're going to give you some slack. I'm not trying to rap and rhyme, but that shit happens all the time.
So,
and sorry, go ahead.
This is kind of amusing. In Korean, the word niga, N-I-G-A, and nega, N-A-E-G-A, mean you and I.
Yeah, and it's in Chinese too.
Yeah, and these are words that just like, man, they how unfortunate that this word is so like strongly.
But listen, bro, black people aren't stupid.
No, I know.
I've heard nigger enough to know when somebody's saying nega, which is why when Chinese or Korean people say nega, black people don't even fucking bat an eye at that shit. We don't bat an eye at that shit because we can hear the A. We can hear when somebody's trying to call us a hard R, we hear that shit. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, and this is where I know nega from hearing it in Chinese. But what? Oh, nega. Like, because you hear it in like just people casually saying, and if you're around enough Chinese people, you're gonna eventually hear somebody say it.
Yep.
in person. Like, are they talking about? No, they're not talking about me. And it's like you hear it in conversation as a black person, and you're hypersensitive to it to the point that if I hear it in a fucking grocery store, the first time I heard it, I was like, what? The second time I heard it, I immediately knew what they said because I've heard the one that's not nega enough times to know that they're not trying to say the other one. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And this is, I think, one of the reasons you don't get a lot more antagonizing between black people and Chinese or Koreans over that term, because a lot of black people could probably hear the difference in what I'm saying, in the sense of I don't think white people are good at picking out sounds traditionally, which is why you get misnamed shit all over the country. So it's like that, I think, they
called Guangzhou Canton for like 50 years.
Exactly, shit like that.
Because they thought
Japan is Nippon.
Yeah,
it's fucking Nippon. I don't know how we got Japan. Oh, you sure you don't mean Japan? I think I heard a J in there somewhere. I'm gonna go ahead and call it Japan.
Wow.
So, man, we have whole fucking countries that Americans have bastardized the name and then go on to make fun of the bastardized version of that name, like Turkey. You know what I'm saying? How many people have you heard make turkey jokes, even though that's like not how you actually fucking say that? Like, that's not, if you say turkey, like, that's not a turkey. And the idea that Americans are so bad at hearing sounds that the first thing they hear, like the bird? No, not like the fucking bird, you moron. Clean your ears. Clean your ears. No, there's like multiple syllables, not just two. So I I definitely know that black people are not confusing nigga with nigga. You know what I mean? And in my own personal experience from hearing that shit out in public, and I'm not implying you were saying that, but
I'm just saying that it's really unfortunate that they're
it's actually not that big of a deal. And this is where it sounds like it would be a horrible deal, but because
well, it is for BTS. One of their songs called that is literally "You and I's" are basically like the entirety of the lyrics is banned on U.S. radio and streaming platforms because they're just saying "you and I."
That's white people, bro. White
I know.
Yeah.
I think that's why I think it's unfortunate. It's like,
and that's what I'm saying. White people do that type of shit where they're like, "Oh, you said this. I think you actually meant that. We're gonna ban it." Because then go watch African American vernacular English with subtitles on, bro. They put the hard R when black people say the N word. That's not right. That's not right. And I've seen it on many closed caption screens or feeds where you got black people speaking back and forth, and you got the subtitles with them calling each other hard R. Like, whoa, bro, whoa, who did these captions? Who did these captions? Because that's definitely not what they just said. That adds a whole different dynamic to this discussion or this conversation, if that's what was being said. So it's an epidemic, honestly. The whole reason I went down this path is because there has been so many misinterpreted sounds from native or non-English speaking people trying to say something to an English speaking person, them completely fucking up what they heard and then renaming it into something that's like not what was originally said. Like Al-Khawarizmi got turned into algorithm because they couldn't fucking hear his name right. That's where algorithm came from, because they couldn't fucking pronounce Al-Khawarizmi.
Al-Khawarizmi sounds cool, though.
It is cool. It's a cool ass fucking name.
Yeah.
But guess what? English people couldn't understand it.
Algorithm.
I'm gonna call you algorithm.
Algorithm.
I'm just gonna call you Al for short. How about that, Al?
Algorithm misspells the word rhythm. That's all I've got to say. Like, if they couldn't. Yeah, there's so many times where it's pretty clear that the subtitles are, or the CC is just wrong. and I gotta admit, like, companies like Google, they've done a lot of work in speech recognition, and AT&T, the U.S. government.
Yeah, actually, shout out to Google for giving people the capacity to get closed caption in real time on
practically anything
on calls. Because I know I've talked to people who have hearing disabilities, and they can just turn on closed captioning when I'm talking to them, and it makes it easier for them to like actually have conversations with people, because they can get transcriptions of what I'm saying in real time, which is that's pretty badass, because handicapped people are always left out. And it's like that little level of accessibility. I'm like, yeah, Google is a fucking evil ass organization. But yeah, I guess Zoom does it too. So good job, guys. At least you're starting to realize that other abled people exist, and everybody's not 100% thinking about exclusively abled people like on everything. So yeah, there's some movement. Good job.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or